Hi, everyone. My name's Diane Mezzanotte, and I'm the curator of a little free library in Laurel, Maryland called the Oakcrest Little Free Library. And I'm here today to talk with Mike Hurd. And as some of you might know, Mike is a 9 times published author as of this particular book. And he has a really interesting series of books out. We've talked to him before, and we're here today to talk about his latest called Of Time and Place. So welcome, Mike.
Hi, Diane. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, good to see you. So, yeah, here we are again. It doesn't seem like that long ago. And we were talking about your last book. And this is number 9 in your, what I call your family history series. Do you want to explain a little bit about that and the whole concept of your series of books?
Sure. Several years ago, I was doing some genealogical research that was kind of queued up by our deceased son before he passed away. And using that, I started to find intersect points between my family tree and events in history on primarily my father's side, but a little bit on my mother's side as well. And then thought it would be interesting to try to craft a storyline around where my family tree would have intersected with events in history, like King Charles II fleeing from England, the American Revolution, the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather being murdered in 1894, things like that, World War I, the Depression, and just hitting all of those intersect points. And then on my mother's side, their emigration from what is now Ukraine, through Poland to Bremen, Germany, and then to the United States. That was a pretty interesting story to try to write as well. So all those little intersect points have provided a wealth of material for the books as they have developed.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying this series, Mike. It's a little surprise to me sometimes when I see suddenly we're talking about Aaron Burr or Alexander Hamilton. And I think I might have texted you. I was reading a book while I was at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore in the waiting room. And I was reading one of your books, I think, and here was a connection to Hopkins. So that was pretty wild. Very interesting. I think maybe it had to do with the building. I saw a building that had the name.
Henry Mills Hurd, the first administrator of Johns Hopkins Hospital, I think he's my first cousin 4 times removed or something like that, or second cousin. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of begats in there that I have to sit there and look at on a piece of paper. But that connection actually inspired the storyline for book 8, Ground Faults.
Right. And as I read that one, then I thought back to when I'd asked you about the connection to Hopkins with the building name. So it's been really interesting. It makes me think that if all of us did that and did what you did, we could maybe find some connections out there that we weren't aware of. So it's good for you for taking on this project. I mean, I'm just amazed at how many books and how many stories you've woven at this point. So I'm supposed to be a published writer by now. I'm not there yet, but congratulations for your success. So in this book, so you mentioned the previous book where interestingly it had a connection with electricity and lightning. And I see that you have as your background, I assume, the cover of book number 9, and I see some lightning again.
Yes. The lightning factors into an incident in the story.
Okay.
And I don't want to go too much more in detail than that, other than it does heavily influence the storyline.
Okay, gotcha. And we'll try not to give away too many spoilers, but can you maybe give a little bit of a gist of this one? I will say that this book took a very different approach than your other books in a couple of ways. Let's talk first of all about the type of book you wrote. Want to give a little bit of a gist of it and why this one is different and maybe how you got there?
Sure. The book is the main male and female characters are retired naval officers. The main male character is a retired Navy captain, a special warfare officer, and graduate of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. Now that's just right down the road from us.
Right.
His wife, on the other hand, is a retired Navy communications officer, and they managed to inherit a yacht from his side of the family. and they're out on their yacht with another couple, doing what couples do on yachts at sea. And he goes missing. And she ultimately finds him, but not in a way that you would expect. And the challenge, or the way I set the book up, was that I was writing the book in basically a two-path approach. I was writing everything about the female character in third person, he, she, it,
Right.
fly on the wall sort of thing, observing what was going on around her.
Yes.
But whenever the main male character was going on, it was always in first person. I, me, we, everything was written from his perspective. And it was a challenge, but loads of fun to do. It was a completely different approach rather than my usual, tying a storyline to facts. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of fun.
It almost delves into science fiction a little bit, which was the surprise to me. And I kind of enjoyed that. I liked it. And you talked about the different narrative voices. I was going to ask you how challenging it was to do that. Like, I assume you would maybe write a chapter. It's probably not a spoiler to say some chapters have both his and her narratives going. So would you write like the whole chapter, or did you plot out, say, her whole story and his whole story and then merge them?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because when I write, I never know where the story's going to go.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those where I write. I'm what they call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants, as opposed to a plotter, which outlines pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Before they go along, and then writes the story to fit the outline. Me, the story goes where the story goes. And so, it's not so much that it's just a stream of consciousness, but I do, all of a sudden, at some point, I will say, okay, I want the story to go this direction. Mm-hmm. And I take it that way, but filling in that space between points A and B often takes little twists and turns.
I love that. So you're creating your characters. You have basically a loose structure for the time period and such, and you just let them kind of come alive for you. Yeah,
I let them tell their own story.
That's great. In this particular one, what is your family connection within this story?
Well, the main family connection is actually to the area around New Haven and Fairfield, Connecticut. It looks from my research that one branch of my family came to the colonies in approximately 1637 on board a sailing vessel called the Hector. Now, I did mention the Hector in the book, and along with a couple of other ships, and the fact that they came in, and that Reverend Peter Pruden that showed up in there was the family connection in the book. Okay, so he's actually in my family tree, far back. And that Jehu Burr was Aaron Burr's great grandfather or grandfather, one of the two, right? And Aaron Burr is also in my family tree. So those connections right there was, I took those and said, okay, this is going on in 1630, in the 1630s, 40s, and 50s. What is going on in society at that point in time? And how can I bring my storyline to tell the story of my family without telling the story of my family? Yes. So that was the fun of the whole thing, was doing all that research, back through historical records and birth records and established genealogies to come up with the people that were in the story. Sure. Now, next week, I'm actually going to be in New Haven, Connecticut, for just an overnight stay on the way to Rhode Island. So there is a church in your story that plays a key role. And I'm wondering, is that a real church? Should I look for this church when I'm there? It is actually not a real church. Okay. It's somewhat fictitious, but based on loosely on the story of the United Church on the Green, all right, which was built over top of a cemetery. Right? So the storyline has a church that factors both at the beginning and the end of the story, but is not necessarily the United Church.
Got it.
But the fact, the cemetery connection, remember there's a cemetery that's mentioned, right? That cemetery would have been, close to wherever the story took place.
Okay, interesting. You did a really good job, I think, of setting the scene of this particular point in time and in our history. And I learned some interesting things as well. One thing you mentioned, the boat, the Hector, and as you're talking of some of these ships that come into that area, it was mentioned, I think, that they, at that time, they were named a single name after a person, like a person's name, which was something I wasn't aware of. So that was interesting. And I got the feel that, it felt like I was there in some of the scenes. I thought you did a very good job of describing things. Have you been to New Haven to check out the area?
I have not. I mean, remember, Yale University is in New Haven.
Yes.
And the Village Green next to Yale, of course, does play a part in the story. But I have not been there. I've done a lot of looking at pictures of New Haven and older photographs of the historical documents. And I mean, I would love to be able to go there, to go wherever my books are being set, but it's just not logistically feasible a lot of times.
Sure. And the nice thing about today is you can do so much of that research, and even, sometimes look at a live camera view, and it's right here, at the tip of our fingers with our computers. And I think that's a great resource for people who are doing research for books or for whatever reason. So that's great. Well, I'll look around and see if I see anything that was mentioned in your book. In this particular one, what I wanted to ask you, what you've said that you write the characters and they see where they take you or see where they go. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but did you know how you wanted this one to end, or did that kind of happen from the characters themselves?
I knew when I started that I wanted to bring the two timelines back together again.
Okay.
How I did that, it just kind of came to me saying, okay, this isn't going to work if I do it this way, because it's just going to be too formulary. All right. So I said, well, let's put a little spin on it. And, so that's why it ended the way it did.
Okay. Yeah. I have mentioned to you, and I'll say it to you here again, that I see potential for spin-offs here, or even a movie. Like in this book in particular, as I was reading through it, I was picturing it like a movie. I think it really would lend itself to that. Do you have any aspirations to ever write a movie script or a TV show or anything like that?
Most writers have those aspirations in the back of their mind.
Sure.
Myself included. Whether it ever actually happens, I don't know. It would be nice, but in the small market publishing world, getting noticed is a dubious notion at best. It's not like I've got to deal with any brick and mortar publishing company. What I did was I established my own.
Correct, right.
And primarily for my own works, but I now have 5 other authors that publish under my imprint. So I'm busy not only with writing but editing and formatting and publishing. And if any one of us hits that that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that would be fantastic for all of us.
Absolutely.
It was a trickle down effect.
Sure.
The entire company. But to your point, the idea of a sequel, I may take the way I constructed of Time and Place. I may take the main female character and the other person she ends up being involved with. I may take them as the central characters to do what needs to be done to advance the remaining 4 books that I have left to write in the series.
And that was my question. It wasn't clear to me if you have a set number and if you know where the other ones are going to go from now. So you do know how many you're going to wind up with. Yeah,
there's going to be 14 books in the series. With book number 1, of course, laying the background for the other 13, where each vignette chapter in book 1 was set up so that it could be a full-length novel.
Right.
So, so this was based on, it actually kind of crossed a couple of chapters in book one, but I'm getting to the point now where it's going to become more and more difficult to write, based on the other chapters, because of where the storylines in book one went.
Do you refer back to book one or at times, or?
Well, that's kind of where the connection with the Hector came from, was book one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember in book one, there's that whole chapter about the crossing, where people were coming over from England and how much trouble they had, how sick they got, and how people died and all that stuff.
I do remember that. I didn't remember it was the Hector.
Yeah, it was the captain's log from the Hector.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go back and read that chapter now that I've read this book. I probably should have been doing that all along. But you say it's not necessarily a one-to-one connection, but you pretty much mapped out the general stories you were going to tell.
Yes. And you don't have to read any of the books in sequence. It's not like it's a sequential story. For example, book two jumped ahead to the American Revolution, where book three then jumped ahead to the 1890s. Book four jumped back to the Civil War. Book five jumped back to the time of Henry VIII. Book six jumped to the 1890s to World War II. Let's see, book seven, which one was that? I'm running along here. Book seven was before the French and Indian War. Book eight was the 1900s to 1910s with the electrification of America, and then now here we are back in the 1600s again.
We are just jumping all over history with you. And I love it. It's a really I think it's a unique approach to writing a series, and I commend you for that.
That's why I stopped numbering them. It's because I'm thinking people were inferring that they had to be read sequentially. So I've just changed it now. Instead of Lineage series book number or whatever, it's just a Lineage series.
Right. And that's an important thing to point out, I think, for people watching this who have started, and think you have to read it 1, 2, 3, 4, and you really don't. It was just kind of neat for me to see how many you'd done, and it's right there in the title. But yeah, that's understandable. I like that. So you mentioned that 2 of the main characters had Navy backgrounds. And so did you draw on your own experience when you were talking about, there's a lot of technical information in there about when you're a sea, mm-hmm. and how you navigate and things like that. Is that from your own experience, Mike?
Yes, it is actually. My wife and I had 3 different boats out on Chesapeake Bay at one point in time or another. We had, I started off with a small fishing boat, and then of course got 2-foot itis, and bought 2 boats that were successive, 2 more boats that were successively bigger. But we did spend a lot of time out on the water. And one of the things when you're a big water boater like that is that you monitor the VHF marine radio traffic. And so I got very conversant with the Coast Guard radio procedures overall, for ships and boats transiting up and down the Chesapeake Bay. And so I used that knowledge to write that one chapter where there was stuff going on actually off the Delmarva Peninsula out in the Atlantic Ocean. The procedures, the radio procedures would have been the same, mm-hmm. as would have the search and rescue operation. And let's just stop that right there, because I'm going to give you the story.
We don't want to go too much further. No. So I hope I don't get uncomfortable asking you this question or you answering it, but there's something else a little different about this book. Let's just say it goes into sometimes almost adult material. I don't want to in any way imply that it's certainly not inappropriate or anything, but there are lots of references to, lovemaking and doing what couples do below deck at sea, and, that sort of thing. So I thought there was more of that content this time than before. Did you feel it because you were starting off talking about a couple, and then later on, not to give anything away, but there are other, people in same situation, that you wanted to put that in to add, depth to the relationship. Was it difficult for you to write those scenes? Like me personally, I think if I ever write a book and there's a sex scene in it, I don't want my mom to read it, So how did you handle that? And what was your feeling going into it?
I didn't really have a lot of problem writing those scenes. It felt natural the way I did it. To me. And if you notice, whenever certain things were happening, there was always a tendency to a fade to black.
Yes.
Leaving the reader to infer what they wanted to from what they
Correct.
were. Because one of my pre-readers is a 92-year-old woman in Portugal. She's British, 92-year-old woman in Portugal, and she says, "You know what?" She says, "Sex sells, but you don't need to sell sex." So she's the one that says, I'd much rather read a fade to black, type of thing.
Yes.
And let me draw my own conclusions of what's happening than to have you tell me insert tab A into slot B,
Yes. Well, I totally agree with her for what it's worth. And I did notice that approach, almost like in the old movies where you see the couple go into a room and the door closes, and, you don't have to spell it out to know that it's there. So was it a conscious decision to include those aspects in this story? Did it just come up as the characters grew for you?
I kind of felt they were central to the storyline.
Yeah.
As I was writing, I mean, both of the main characters needed to have some sort of release for their emotional dilemmas and emotional conflicts.
Right.
And so it was just you can't hide that aspect of everyday life.
Sure.
So,
and you shouldn't, in my opinion.
And avoiding it when you're writing a book. Maybe my book will be banned in elementary schools. I don't know. It probably will, but you
won't be able to sell it in certain states, Mike.
No. Oh, well.
Oh, what could help sales too, as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It gets out.
There's nothing dirty in it by any sense.
Right. Again, I want to stress that there's nothing dirty or vulgar or anything about it. It just stuck out to me because it's very different than your other books in several ways. And so that was one of them. Another unique aspect of this book was we learn a bit too about the Quinnipiac in the Connecticut area. And is that something from your family background, or just something you were interested in? Or it looks like you did a lot of research in that as well, including the names. I was curious about where you got the names of those characters.
Well, the Quinnipiac Indians, their tribe doesn't have any status with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They've tried repeatedly to get recognized, and they were somewhat absorbed by the other larger, more prevalent tribes in that area after the Pequot War in the 1640s. So having them show up, yes, there probably was a connection. I mean, you can't avoid it when you're displacing indigenous people.
Right.
So there's got to be an intersect point somewhere there.
Yeah. What about their names? They have interesting names. Did you research them? Do they mean something?
Well, the names that I used came from I looked up the names in a Native American glossary that was unique to that area, the Algonquin dialects that were the Mohawks, the Algonquins, the other tribes of the Hudson River Valley, and just kind of found names that I thought seemed to work, and at the same time had some sort of a meaning. I mean, I explained the names of the Indian characters that showed up in the book. So
correct. Yeah, and I love that about it. So, and I hope it doesn't feel like we're just dissecting this too much, but what I like about chatting with you is that you not only tell us about your book and your approach, but you also give insight into, things like, where do you start if you want to write a book and you realize, oh, it's in the time period where this Quinnipiac tribe was there, and how can I, incorporate that? And So I really appreciate the insight that you give to things like that.
That's what makes the whole process fun, and like
Right.
I've told you before, one of the things that I like is that I like doing the research as much as I do doing the writing. I probably spend, when I'm getting ready to write the book, the first 4 or 5 chapters, I'm spending probably twice as much time researching them as I am actually writing. And then once the storyline starts to gel, then the research kind of says, okay, well, I need to check, could this actually have happened at this point in time? Or, or is it likely, that this type of weapon was even available at that point in time? And I had to change the storyline in one of my other books because the timing for the weapon that showed up wasn't appropriate.
Oh, did you realize that, or did a proofreader find that?
A proofreader pointed it out to me, and then I went back and did some more research, and I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So I had to go back and change that whole storyline.
Oh, wow, the whole storyline.
Now, and the same thing with this one, the dual narratives. I've had one whole chapter written where I forgot I was supposed to be writing about the main male character and his perspective, and I had to go back and rewrite the whole thing.
I do want to say that it was very easy for me to follow that. Sometimes when you have more than one narrative voice in a book, it can get a little confusing. I've seen all kinds of approaches over the years. Like in a Never-Ending Story, I think they use different color ink to be different viewpoints, or I don't know, something, or different characters. Or sometimes they just use a heading to say, John or Marie or whatever. But in your case, you didn't really have to do that because the narrative voice did it for the reader instantly. Like as soon as you catch on what you're doing there, it's instant. And I thought that was a very good technique to employ here. It was very effective.
No, thank you. It was a lot of fun to try to do. I mean, it was, each book, you want to try new things with the book.
Sure.
And once you set on an approach, it's if it doesn't feel natural, throw it out and start over again. And this one just felt natural right from the start.
Good. This seems to have come pretty fast for you. Is this your typical timeline? I haven't really been tracking how long it takes for each book, but this one I thought, did it come faster to you than some of the other ones? You're publishing very soon.
It seemed to. I mean, the last one was book 8 was released back in late October, early November. And then, of course, this one's following 5 months later.
It's
a
incredible.
Combination of several things. Having some time, when we were traveling or whatever, to be able to write uninterrupted was a huge benefit to putting this one together. We were back in January. We were gone for 2 weeks, and I wrote probably 8 or 9 out of the 14 days we were gone, and for hours at a time, and I was just in a zone where it just felt really, really comfortable to be writing.
And isn't that a great feeling when you get into that zone?
Oh, when you have it really is.
Do you have any tricks? Like, do you ever experience writer's block, and do you have a way to try to jump out of that somehow?
I'll be honest with you. There was a time with this one, I didn't touch it for almost 3 weeks because for that very issue, I was kind of stuck in a certain place in the story that I couldn't see my way out of. And so what I do when that happens is I reach out to my other authors in the group and say, hey, you guys got anything you're working on you want me to take a look at? And then I drop out of writer author into editor, publisher, formatter mode. And it seems to help me. That mental diversion helps me get back on track for my own writing.
Oh, good. And in the meantime, you might be helping them as well.
Yes.
So I like that you've built like your own collaborative group of writers that build each other up and look over each other's work. And I think that's really neat. I know that some, if not all of them, are not in the United States. Is that correct? So that might be challenging at times with the time differences.
Yeah, 4 out of the other 5 are overseas. The 3 of them in England, and one is in Portugal. She's a British expatriate that retired to the nether regions of Portugal, along with her mother. She's the 92-year-old mother who's one of my best supporters and strongest critics. So but it's just a lot of fun to work with these people, and we've kind of stumbled across each other by accident.
Oh.
You know, and just through good social media engagement.
Uh-huh.
You know.
Well, it's nice to hear a good success story from social media. I think it gets a lot of negative press, and there are some negative aspects to it, but right here's a perfect example of how it can be a positive and bring people together. So that's great.
So my countdown timer is telling me we're running short. So
Yeah.
what else do we need to talk about in the next 3 or 4 minutes we've got left?
Well, do you know what's next? You said you are thinking about some things, or will you let it just kind of settle for a while before you start on the next one?
I'm probably going to let my own work sit at least for a little while until I come up with an idea. Because I've got one of my British authors has got a book that I'm working on right now. The lady in Portugal's got 2 sitting in the hopper waiting for me to edit and format.
Oh, good.
The one of the other 2 British women has got one that she's working on. She was a magician's assistant for almost a quarter of a century.
Oh, wow.
And so
there's got to be stories there.
Huh?
There's got to be stories there.
Yeah, she's already told me that she's not going to be writing fiction this time.
Oh.
So we'll see what happens with that.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. I think it's remarkable. I keep saying that, but how many books you've published. I envy you. I admire that for you. And also having these connections and forming your own publishing company. So that's really great as well. I mean, most people retire to golf all day, Mike. You're doing it wrong.
This is mental gymnastics. I mean, you got to keep your mind sharp as well as your body.
Totally agree.
So totally to see a huge difference to be able to do this sort of thing, which is, our backgrounds, you're always writing factual material, no embellishment, no storylines, just the facts.
Just the facts. Yeah.
And so being able to step back from that, I think you've probably seen a transition as my writing has evolved away from that just the facts presentation.
Yes, absolutely.
To a more creative approach.
Yes. And I love that you're letting your creative wings spread and you're flying with it. So it looks like our time is about up. I've
got less than a minute.
I've really enjoyed talking with you, and went by quickly as always. So congratulations. And I look forward to the release of the book coming April 4th.
April 4th. The paperback could be available earlier on Amazon.
Excellent. Great. Good job, Mike. Congrats.
All right. Thank you, Diane. It's been a pleasure talking with you as always.
Same. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.